So I was on organization TikTok to try to figure out, it's a whole hashtag, to try to figure out if there were like other things I could be doing to just make like the kitchen, because we can't hire the organizer yet for a couple different reasons, including that all the ones around here are super duper backed up.
Yeah, everybody
So
is.
It is what it is. But the TikTok led me to discover something called a bread buddy, which is like a tall tube that you put the bread in, and then you wrap the label, like the bag, around the edges. And as you need more bread, you just pull the bag down and the bread comes up because physics, but it's a Tupperware container that keeps your bread fresh. A bread buddy. You can purchase them on the Amazon.
Neat.
So we're excited about that because John and I eat two different breads.
Yeah.
So we need two different. So we're excited. Bread buddies coming this week. We're going to try that. We're very stoked about fresh bread.
Cool. Let me know about it because we sometimes forget and then it gets moldy, or we have to put it in the fridge, and I don't like cold bread.
I actually loathe cold bread. I loathe cold sandwiches. Like if I buy a sandwich from Wawa in the morning, like that's legitimately loathe. I will not put it in the fridge.
Yeah.
Because why? Jade is called a bread buddy. I believe it is. I will definitely share the review when it arrives. We also got a couple new cereal containers.
Nice.
Because I would like to be eating more cereal, but our pantry isn't organized for cereal storage. These are significant problems in my life, everybody. Significant issues.
You don't have to tell me. I spent the entire pandemic organizing my life, so.
Yeah, and I just spent it ordering artisan ice cream, so I'm a little behind, but we're getting there. All right. We're going to stop dancing to that song one of these days, but it's not anytime soon.
No, anytime soon. No, I just dig it.
Cheery. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Good Doctor's Diagnose for October 26th. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I am Dr. Erin.
We are going to get started, as always, with our empathy exercises. And I just realized that the Audacity is right in the middle of the empathy exercise. Okay, let me move that window. Sorry.
Minimize Audacity. You're all right.
All right. So I found this one actually, and this is a niche interest, we admit, but the Police Service of Northern Ireland, which is abbreviated to the PSNI, has come out that there were 134 sexual assault allegations against PSNI officers in 5 years. And you, if you are living in somewhere larger than Northern Ireland, might be like, that's not a lot. Well, first of all, let me tell you, that's 134 people, and that's still really crappy. But also, Northern Ireland's tiny. There's only about 1.5 million people in it. So it's a real, and again, as we always say with sexual assault allegations, these are the women that came forward, or the people that came forward, which we believe is only about 10% of the cases in general as a rule of thumb.
Yeah.
So this isn't great. There's a sexual assault charity in Northern Ireland called Nexus that I've worked with. I think you've had interactions with them too, Erin. Yeah.
Yep.
That we trust implicitly. And they're kind of like on this, especially in light of Wayne Couzens, who was the Metropolitan Police officer convicted and sentenced in the murder of Sarah Everard. So this is a particular, from this report, and then I read another report. I don't know if you saw something different, Erin. I have not seen an investigation into how many of these officers were uniformed at the time.
Yeah, I haven't seen any more on it, shockingly. But yeah, that would be a key part of it. Obviously, Wayne Couzens was not in uniform, but was acting as a police officer at the time in order to coerce Sarah Everard into his car. So yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where, we talk a lot about the culture of permissibility and within rape culture and by and large that we use encompassing concept to talk about all of this kind of stuff. And it's really hard, especially in these, within police institutions and regulatory bodies, to speak up against abuse. So I think it's really, like, your point was well made, and I'm just going to say it again because it needs said again. Like, these are the ones that reported against serving police officers within a police institution in a country. Like, these are the reported ones. So it appears that the PSNI has a real big problem.
Yes. And I know colloquially that this has been going on for a lot longer than 5 years. So it'll be interesting to see how far back data has been collected and by whom. So moving on to another terrible thing. This is again across the pond into British universities, but I will tell you, if anyone ever did this into American universities, the numbers would be even more staggering. After a 2-year investigation by Al Jazeera, they discovered that British universities are failing to protect students from sexual harassment by their lecturers, allowing them to carry on teaching even when there are multiple complaints over many years. I can tell you, I know of 4 particular professors at 3 different British institutions that have had multiple accusations by friends of mine who are still employed. So it is, again, an issue. If we even scratch the surface of this in the United States, we would all be horrified. And then at the same time, most of us wouldn't be shocked. So we'll link this everywhere. The entire report by Al Jazeera, as always, is thorough and excellently crafted. Definitely would recommend watching it. Please remember that university students are always considered a vulnerable population because of the psychological transitions that are happening. And also timing of this, a 2-year investigation means that some of this may have happened during the COVID. So, which is even particularly terrible considering that it would have been some sort of cyber something. So just keep in mind all of the young people legitimately at the other end of this, including, of course, I mean, they're all legal adults in a university setting, but let's talk about emotional or psychological adults. That's a different ballgame.
Totally. Their brains are not fully cooked.
No, not until we're 25 at the earliest. So,
all right.
This is on you, Indian country correspondent.
This is on me. This is vaguely related to indigeneity, because pretty much everything is. But this came across my Twitter feed last week, that the Australian government, speaking of, actually, I think this is a good transition because it's related to sexual assault and intimate partner violence in a way, and it's actually positive news. So the Australian government announced that it is offering one-off payments to help people leave violent relationships. From last Tuesday, victims can apply for $3,700 US, which includes cash and direct payments for expenses such as school fees. The scheme is open to all genders, but we know statistically, disproportionately, it's going to affect women and females presenting as women. So, I mean, this is a huge part of intimate partner violence and domestic violence, right? Is sometimes, especially when there's children involved, but even when there's not, it's really difficult for the person who's being abused to leave their relationship if they don't have enough money to find housing, find a job, escape, and a lot of times people who are abused will stay in relationships and in a home because they don't have the awareness of the resources available or the access to them. So big up on the Australian government for that. A side note attached to this article in CNN, and we'll link the report as well, is just a heads up, not surprisingly, that violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women is higher than white Australian women. And so this is a particular issue that impacts these people groups more. And so we've got this great executive summary on the urgency of preventing violence against those marginalized and oppressed groups. So hopefully the Australian government takes that on board with the payment schemes. We'll keep a weather eye on it.
As always.
As always. All right. Next up, I'm sure a lot of you out there in the ether and on the interwebs have seen some of the pushback and protest against Dave Chappelle, stand-up comedian Dave Chappelle's newest Netflix stand-up comedy special, where he, uses homophobic and transphobic and anti-LGBTQ plus language, which he has done throughout his comedy career.
Yeah, this isn't new. Our anger is just new.
No. So what's new is that Netflix trans employees and allies who work at Netflix are organizing and presenting a formal list of demands and protesting in a way that they'll, like a labor protest, refusing to work ahead of a walkout. So they listed all of these demands, and it says taking down the Dave Chappelle special isn't one of them, but what they wanted to do was encourage the company and push the company to adopt measures in the area of content investment, employee relations and safety, and harm reduction, all of which are necessary to avoid future instances of platforming transphobia and hate speech. So what's not new about this is that Dave Chappelle is using transphobic and homophobic language in his comedy. What's new about this is the employees and allies for the behemoth Netflix are pushing back and saying, not on our watch. This is not okay anymore to implicitly and actively sanction hate speech by putting that comedy special on the platform. So we will also keep an eye on this to see what, if anything, changes with Netflix.
Sasha says to us that it's less comedy, more rant. And I'll be honest, that's how I've always found Dave Chappelle's performances. But I wonder if he is somebody whose time has passed. We'll see.
We'll see.
Speaking of somebody whose time is definitely not past. Heyo.
Good one. I don't know if anybody saw recently the beloved, and I say beloved both culturally and between Dr. Kristen and I, Harry Styles, was on the cover of Vogue wearing close to or an actual dress. And if you know Harry, he experiments a lot with different clothing styles and aspects of femininity and masculinity and marrying those two things. He is not open at all about his sexuality, but is very supportive of queerness and kind of blurring those fashion lines and presentation lines. The article, if you read this, NPR, goes on to say, the only people you've seen him publicly with are women, but that's not to say he's not bisexual or some other sexuality. Who knows? So Harry Styles is on the cover of Vogue for being Harry Styles, and Billy Porter claps back. So that went on the rounds of social media, but I really liked this article because it clapped back a little bit at Billy Porter. And it says a little bit right in the beginning, Billy Porter is partially right and also wrong, because his point was, I don't know that he knows Harry Styles, but he was alleging that Harry Styles doesn't care about changing these fashion mores or pushing boundaries. Arguably, I think he does if he's wearing a dress. He's just doing it because it's the thing to do. This is politics for me. This is my life. And he said,
Billy always has feelings with a capital F, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah. And I think this is a generational hiccup, because he says, I had to fight my entire life to get the place where I could wear a dress to the Oscars. And he's right. And he did. And he says, all Harry had to do was be white and straight. Well, he is white. We don't know if he's straight. But yeah. So I thought this was interesting because like it's easy to look to see both sides of this, but to see Billy Porter's side, and a lot of other folks. We talk a lot on our channel about non-queer presenting or just non-queer folks being representative of queerness, broadly speaking, or specifically. So I understand the pushback that they didn't have a queer man in a dress, but like if we're pushing the bounds of masculinity and femininity, your sexuality shouldn't matter. Like you can just push the boundaries. So it shouldn't matter whether Harry Styles is gay or straight or bi or whatever. If he wants to wear a dress and he wants to change that perception and push against the gender perceptions of clothing, like go for it. And so they make the point in the NPR article, which I thought was really good, and I'll end on that, Billy Porter wasn't also the first presenting male to push the boundaries of fashion. And a lot of the people that inspired Harry Styles that he said openly is Prince, Elvis, Freddie Mercury, David Bowie. All of those musicians also really like changed the way that we think about dress and male and female presenting. And they also bring up as well Janelle Monáe and Lil Nas X, who are more contemporary. So I thought it was an interesting discussion and more meatier for our GDD empathy exercises, because I can understand where Billy's coming from, but I also feel like it's coming, I think, from his generational perspective, that he had to grow up in a world where it was so much harder. And I'm not saying it's easier for everyone who is non-gender binary or gender fluid or whatever. I think it's still really hard for a lot of people who aren't Harry Styles. But things are changing. And yeah, I think I'm done. I worked myself out of that, and now I lost my train of thought. So
that's fair. Siobhan brings up a good point that Harry is applauded and non-cisgendered folks are looked down on. Yeah, and that is that's a great very, point. Very true. And I think what'll be really interesting as we move forward is that a lot of the more famous transgender folks, I think of Laverne Cox, are still very single gender presenting within their transness, if that makes sense. So there's not like a publicly non-binary transgendered person. Is there?
Not that I can think
Not
of.
that I can think of. And there's a lot more gender fluidity. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the difficulties too is that, and what I completely believe that Billy's points are valid. It definitely the way that his clapbacks in public smacked of was it was really hard for me. It should be hard for you, which is not necessarily an attitude that I find a particular amount of identification with. Yeah, but it's just not how I vibe. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's like it's a difficult situation, right? And this is why I thought it made for a good empathy exercise, because as you guys can see and hear, we are struggling to talk about this. Because I take Siobhan's point, and I think it's a great point that very often, Freddie Mercury was straight, we think, or bi, but his bi-ness was like not really talked about in the way that his relationships with women were. And so a lot of times you get presenting cisgender people are given way more leeway than non-binary, non-cisgendered folks. But also, like, I think it's saying something that he's, pretty cisgendered and pretty straight as far as we know. And he's got this platform to push these boundaries too. So like, I can see both sides of that coin. It's sticky business, but I thought it would be a good discussion. It was
in the largest boy band of the 21st century, like even beyond being cis and potentially presenting straight or whatever. I mean, at one point he talked about being gender fluid. I have no idea if that's stuck. Like that was seemed to be a phrase he was playing around with more than an identity he was playing around with.
Yeah, I think he's figuring it out like everyone. So
like we're all figuring it out. It's just really funny. I have a friend who's a fashion designer, and who says that she doesn't understand why it was gender fluidity when women wanted to wear pants, but now it's gender fluidity when men want to wear dresses.
Yeah.
And it's like one of the things that just makes her laugh.
That's
I
a
don't
good
think she's
point.
particularly like mad about it, but she's like, "Are you being gender fluid because you're wearing like jodhpurs?" I was like, "I don't know. I don't care."
Am I gender fluid because I like pockets?
Yeah, exactly. She's like, "This is just a really interesting evolution of fashion." She's
Yeah.
not throwing shade on anybody. She's
Sure.
just being really, really fascinated. So obviously this conversation is going to continue because all of our conversations continue. But now to our friends who are live with us and our replay crew, let's get into the main topic.
Let's do it.
So I'm going to drive this for just a couple minutes because this one is one of my particular, I don't know, hobby horses. How do we? So this all started, you can, for anyone who saw the title. Intersections. For anyone who saw the title, you'll know that we're talking about American diet culture. And this has been spurred by a recent documentary on HBO Max called The Way Down, which is a 3-part documentary about honestly, a woman with the largest hair known to humankind named Gwen Shamblin, who, for all intents and purposes, ran a cult in Brentwood, Tennessee.
Yeah.
And that I inadvertently participated in when I was a child.
Like pre-cult though. I'm not sure The Way Down itself was a cult. It's the Reverend Fellowship.
Like the Revenant Church, yeah.
Revenant Fellowship. Revenant Fellowship that became the Remnant part. Yeah, I mean, if you want to say you participated in a cult, you go for it, girl. I'll back you.
I think it's hard to... there's a lot of people that claim evangelicalism is a cult, and I am not one of those people. For a host of reasons. My particular church certainly wasn't. I'm sure there are churches that are, but mine isn't, for a host of reasons. But I also am aware that one of the reasons I am drawn to talk about cults and study cults is my childhood and my adolescence. It's one of the reasons that I am so drawn to it. So The Way Down is a weight loss program, and it was massive in the 90s. Massive, especially in Protestant churches around the United States. It never really went overseas. Thank God. That's not one of the things we exported. But it was very, very popular in the United States. And the premise of the Way Down workshop is essentially intuitive eating. Eat when you're hungry, stop when you're not. And that's been around since we've had food. So it's not revolutionary. No. What was particularly revolutionary / abhorrently toxic was that she married it with the theology that God could only use people if they were thin. And that God prized thinness. Interestingly, nothing about Jesus, a lot about God, which we would later go on to learn. And it's because in her theology, Jesus is not divine. But
she doesn't believe in the Trinity.
Doesn't believe in the Trinity, which is a little bit of a challenge for to call yourself a Protestant. It's a just a little bit of a challenge. Other people are going to be disagreeing with that strongly.
Generally a requirement.
So in terms of that process of telling people that God could only use you for the work of the kingdom if you were thin, I want to unpack for just a few minutes the ramifications of that belief in my own life as an example of the ramifications of those kind of beliefs across diet culture. So if you all will indulge me for a few moments. It does not in any way, shape, or form understand that different bodies are different. It believes that all bodies are exactly the same and can be controlled the same way. This is a viewpoint of both body and health privilege. There is no allowance within this particular diet, and honestly, almost any diet I have ever been on, for different bodies and for different lifestyles and for different realities. The narrative of diet culture is always, you just don't want it enough. And so forcing yourself into thinness as a show of your faith in God, imagine how it feels when you can't get thin and yet you still want to love God with your whole heart. Anytime we add deity or a faith system on top of something, it makes it increasingly vile and increasingly abusive. It also makes it increasingly impossible to argue against. And so the narrative that's in my head that I am working to unpack, and honestly, because I was so young when it was planted there, will probably be fighting against for the rest of my life, is that the reason that X, Y, and Z hasn't happened is that I don't love God enough to be thin. That I am not a good enough person to do this. I'm not alone in this belief, by the way. And while it may be caught up with my theology in a very specific way because of this way down nonsense, the moral judgments that come with being fat, especially in the United States, is insidious and vile. Food is neutral. It is not a moral judgment. You are not a better person if you eat carrots than chocolate. However, the diet culture of the United States, specifically since the 80s, has taught us that fat people are bad and thin people are good. Subconsciously and out loud. Some people just say it out loud. Gwen Shamblin said the quiet things right out loud.
On a big old stage.
Big old stage, many of them.
On Good Morning America.
I also, for the record, have been on the Atkins diet. I've been on South Beach. I've been on the cottage cheese diet. I went to Weight Watchers. I was in Jenny Craig when I was 12. I have done it all. And all I have learned is that if I hate my body, which is exactly what diet culture wants me to do, I will only eat more. And all it has given me is a really disordered relationship with food. I don't say that I have suffered from disordered eating for a host of reasons, and that's a medical decision on my part. But I have a very disordered relationship with food that I did nothing to deserve or nothing to foster in my own human little Kristen self. I need to cough really briefly, so I'm going to mute my mic. Hold on.
I will bring in Siobhan here, who said that her friend was forced to go through these classes at her evangelical church as a child. It caused disordered eating and an incredible amount of shame. She's sorry that you had to go through this. Thank you, Siobhan, for sharing that. And yeah, I mean, that your point, Siobhan, goes to with Dr. Kristen's point that, you know, she's not alone in this, and that it was a horribly toxic and abusive subculture within dieting in the 90s and 2000s.
And I want to be clear that I went through this and went through all of this because my parents were told by the culture that it would be loving. My parents were told that it was loving to me to raise me thin. That is not their fault either. The diet culture in the United States is insidious. And one of the reasons I actually loved living in the UK is that it wasn't as much. There was still some really toxic crap over there called Slimming World, which we're not going to get into, but
y'all.
And there's some great intuitive eating accounts out of Ireland that are really playing with the way the church talked about food that I love, that if I remember, I will link in the show notes. And we're also going to link our diet culture resource list that we are slowly curating as well. It is very, very anemic at the moment because it's just been a little hard for me to touch some of these things, but we're going to keep adding to it. And if you have resources, we would love to. I'll say this before I move on. My favorite resource is the Maintenance Phase podcast, who is with Aubrey Gordon and I can't remember Michael's surname, but Aubrey Gordon is the author of What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat. And it is one of she calls herself your fat friend on Twitter. So she is very, very clear about this. But what I would like to say in totality is that when we put moral judgments on thinness and fatness, and we don't allow this to be a conversation with physicians, although whom some of the most abusive things said to me about my body has been by physicians, but that's a separate conversation. When we make bodies moral entities, not bodies' behavior, but actual bodies, what that means is that people can't engage with their full authentic selves without also engaging with someone else's morality. So I can't decide how good or bad I feel about my body without dealing with what you think about my body. And that is a daily, constant thing. And that's diet culture. So we're not going to get into things like The Biggest Loser or stuff like that. But honestly, if you want to do a deep dive at how toxic all this crap is, like YouTube is your friend, there's a lot of people around here talking about it. But we would like to talk about it today, largely because this is a soapbox I wanted to have. Thank you, sorry. And Dr. Aaron was gracious enough to give me the space to publicly process this a little, but also that it is an intersection that is not talked about as an intersection.
Yeah, and I think like, obviously you guys can see me. I have gone my whole life as a thin person. And it's really been my friendship with Dr. Kristen over the last 10 years, and the conversations that we've had and the parts of her trauma that she shared with me, that has helped me to be so much more aware of something that I was not aware of, which was how my body moves through spaces, public spaces, and is perceived in public spaces, and how bodies like Kristen's and other bodies that are outside of what society has deemed the norm, how they exist. And so it has really pushed me to examine that intersection of my life and to learn as much as I can about folks who, chairs are really small in restaurants, or there's not enough room for their wheelchair, or, things aren't appropriately labeled for hard of seeing hard of sight people. So, fat is one of the intersections in which your body does not work the way society wants it to, or says that it should. And for me, it's and I think like this is it's also important to remember that, like, I would say pretty much everyone, but I'll say pretty much everyone has body image issues,
Which is not
regardless.
something I believed for most of my life.
Right. So I've been a thin person. And my mom, I'll use my mom as an example first. My mom was like real skinny when she was in high school and into nursing school and the Navy, like 100 pounds, real thin. And she remembers like everyone telling her mother, "Oh, you've got to get meat on her bones, Mariida. Like, you've got to get meat on her bones. She looks so unhealthy." And it was just my mom's body. And she has a disordered relationship with food and eating because of that. Because I come from a family genetically where we have high metabolism. So, like, when she was my age, when I was her age, like, I could just eat whatever I wanted and the metabolism burned it off. But I still, like, the pressure on thin people to stay thin is also part of this.
Yep.
And it's taken me a long time. And honestly, it's been my relationship with you that's helped me to accept my body as it is more, because I still have a lot of really negative thoughts swirling around, like gaining a couple of pounds and, oh, now I'm not a size 8 anymore, now I'm a size 10, and like the pressure to stay in single digits. And so obviously the flip side of that is, actual medical disordered eating, anorexia and bulimia and all of that. And so it impacts everybody. And I think we need to have a lot more grace and understanding for that. And we really need to do a better job, especially when these baby brains aren't fully cooked like yours was. Mine wasn't. I had nowhere near as damaging experiences as you did. Because we really don't want the next generation to have to spend their entire 30s like unlearning.
I'm tired of
all of this
unlearning.
stuff.
Like,
Yeah.
why do I have to keep...
Yeah.
I really love Taylor's point here, really briefly. I want to bring it up. Diet culture,
Yeah.
especially in the United States, plays so much into the pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality that if you're fat, it's your fault and you're just not trying hard enough. It's like how so many Americans believe poor people don't work hard enough and they
Yeah.
deserve what happens to them. That is exactly
sure.
true, Taylor. That's where a lot of this comes from. And I think that also goes back to what you were saying, Erin, about the pressure to stay thin.
Yeah.
That thinness is connected to effort. And
Yeah.
therefore, if you can't maintain it, I think so much about how much we shame women for post-baby weight and how revolutionary it was when Kate Middleton walked out of the hospital without her girdle on.
Yeah.
And how many women were like, oh my God, that's what I looked like too. Instead of how Diana left the hospital, which evidently was in like 12 pairs of Spanx to be
Jesus.
able to look perfect again.
Yeah.
And it's the thriving industry of postpartum tummy tucks and all of that. And if that brings you joy, mazel. I've had plastic surgery, but I had plastic surgery because I wanted to fit into what other people thought of my body. I'm not entirely sure I cared about my own body.
Yeah.
So it's, and what we have from Sasha is great, which is dealing with hyperthyroidism and now hypothyroidism after ablation really showed me how much chemistry controls everything. Absolutely, Sasha. If
for
we
sure.
don't, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think like, you know, Kristen heard about The Way Down and she was like, I think we should watch it and talk about it. We decided to do it for a GDD. Those of you watching and listening live or on replay, we're also going to do a longer hot-ish take about this and about the idea of wellness as well. Cause it's, you know, there's like a diet industrial complex, there's a wellness industrial complex. We have these systems that are perpetuating such harm in society, especially in American society. But, you know, and I talk about this a lot on all our platforms, but I'm a yoga practitioner, and like the way that yoga has been bastardized into wellness and like how thin you have to be, and oh, you're going to be great at sex because you're going to be so bendy. And I'm like, we've taken something non-Western and like morphed it into, you know, into fit these toxic parameters that we have. And we've done that with a lot of wellness and psychology.
And one of the really shitty overlaps between purity culture and diet culture is the number of times that a lot of fat kids are told essentially that no one will want to have sex with them.
Oh God.
And so I got told that a lot of times. And like what a miracle it was. I was so grateful for dates from terribly abusive men, because I was told that, like, you know, the way I looked determined if I was a good person, et cetera, et cetera. But it's that overlap of bodies are only meant for procreation in purity culture. So therefore they can't be pleasurable and kind of all this other stuff. That one of the points we want to make is that this is all so interconnected and overlapped that separating it out into certain topics is nearly impossible. It is a tapestry of, it's a tapestry of fuckery. And so we need to really start untangling some of it. I see your fingers crossed. Please tell me your point.
Yes, sorry, I just didn't want to forget it, because as you were talking about purity culture, and those good old Puritans, my point was I was still looking at Taylor's couple of comments as well, because I mean, that's the origin of that bootstraps mentality is puritanical theology and the way it was morphed into American, like, public theology. Isn't that what you call it? Maybe?
Yeah.
Yes,
public
American
theology.
public theology.
American civic religion is usually
civic religion. That's
usually what I say.
That's the phrase I was looking for. Yeah. And so, like, that is why we have this uniquely, in a lot of ways, American idea of wellness and health and diet culture and morality associated with that, because it was always the individual's responsibility to fit in with society, to, you know, get the American dream, to get the job, to have 2.5 kids, all of those things. And we've turned it into a moral judgment. And then, you know, we get intersections of race and sexuality and gender in that as well. We get welfare moms, and particularly directed racist language from the government around people who need assistance in the 80s. And again, like, if you've ever seen the show Glow, which we love, one of the wrestling characters is a fat Black woman who wants to be she's like a welfare queen, I think. And she wants to play with that trope and that perception that's what Black women are doing. And it's really cleverly done, and it doesn't go over well with the white men controlling the show, shockingly. But like all of that, like, that's baked into America. And then you get the intersections of gender and race and class and body type and body chemistry and, you know, all of that kind of stuff that makes it so, so murky and so, so American. God bless it.
God bless it. Yeah, I mean, like, people have asked me a lot about what's different about living in Northern Ireland and living in America. And even though the spaces in Northern Ireland were smaller, like the restaurants were smaller, I had more trouble. I never felt as shamed in Northern Ireland as I do here, on a regular basis. And I'm a nerd to it, immune to it on some level here. But it's this relief when I go to that home that's not a piece that I have to carry in my skin as much.
Yeah.
And so and that goes down to the bodies they show on their television, the way they treat bodies, the casualness of nudity, the difference, because caught up in purity culture is the Hollywood studio system and how we shaped how the world saw movies and the world saw Americans and all that kind of other thing. So this is essentially what I'm really saying is that in this tapestry of fuckery, the way that we think about bodies is pretty much at the center of it. And that we have made moral judgments on bodies forever: size, gender, shape, behavior, everything. And so maybe we should just mind our own business.
Maybe it's none of our business. Yeah, I wanted to bring in Sasha again, saying I used to judge fat people morally as a teen. Same, so did I. And Sasha,
so did I.
Severe anorexia. I'm so glad we can grow and learn and unlearn things to be better people. Yes, agreed. Also, she is a big fan of the tapestry of fuckery phrase, which, y'all, I wish I could tell you that, like, Dr. K plans this stuff. This is why she's the idea person, and I'm the organizer person. I help with ideas. I add to them. I sprinkle sprinkles on the cake she's already baked. And, you know, it's a lot of things are collaborative, but a lot of things just come out of her mouth and they're brilliant. And I'm glad you guys could witness it, because usually it's just the two of us on Zoom and I look at her and be like, did you just make that up? And she goes, yeah, I did. So I'm glad y'all can see that she just goes like word salad greatness on the reg.
Changing the subject because that makes me uncomfortable. We are
no more praise for Dr. Kristen because she's getting squirmy.
Because I'm getting squirmy and turning bright red, even more than my rosacea on my cheeks are starting to lean. Which, by the way, I learned that I have to get a green tinted moisturizer to cancel out this stuff on my cheeks. Yeah. So thank you, TEDx Chicago makeup artist.
Oh, great. I totally didn't make that connection, but there was a ginger once on Queer Eye and Jonathan Van Ness, JVN, gave him green tinted moisturizer to help with his redness.
There you go. Evidently it cancels it out. So I'm really excited. What I love this comment from Jay was that this is an adult. For anyone who doesn't know, Jay is an adult person. So as an adult, she gained weight recently, which, like, let's be honest, the panini means that most of us have. And the where does it all fit in and how that, and I'm glad, thanks for sharing that, Jay, because I think that that's really part of my journey personally, is that I have thrown away every scale in my house and I no longer let doctors or physicians tell me my weight. And I'm actually even at a gym and with a trainer, and my trainer knows that at no point in time is she allowed to weigh me. She weighed me at the beginning just because that's for their insurance purposes, but she was so clear. She covered it. She was kind. And it's one of the reasons that I will stay with her in particular, because she's very, and I think some of it is that she's a Gen Z. And so she understands a little bit differently in how it's going. But the process of your body changing as an adult, and we've talked about, you know, Jay also brought up post-baby part. Jay has two sons who we treat as our emotional nephews. So our Canadian emotional nephews. But we have lots and lots of friends who have had children who have used it all things. I have friends that will not breastfeed because they are already tired of giving their body over. I have friends that breastfeed because it'll help them lose the weight. I have it's the complicatedness of motherhood and bodies. Actually, sometime in December, Dr. Aaron and I are going to go to an exhibit here at the Mutter Museum about motherhood and how motherhood bodies are talked about in the United States and around the world. And so you guys will go with us, don't worry, as we do that. But we're very, very excited. And we're aware that there's a lot of things here around even diet culture and the psychology around it. We obviously are not men. But I have watched my father on a diet for most of my life, and how his masculinity is so tied to his physical strength and his physical body, and the incredible disservice that we have done to men to tie their masculinity to their bodies in the way that we have tied femininity to women's bodies. But I wanted to bring men briefly into the conversation to say that this is toxic and fuckery for them as well.
For everyone. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And my father has, you know, a disordered relationship with eating and with his weight, and always has, that came from his parents and like what he was expected. And yeah, so I think that's such a great point. And we, in our sharing our personal stories, neglected that we're only one representation of the myriad of humans out there.
Yeah.
It's hard for everybody, because we've tied this moral value to what you look like.
So I think we're going to hit pause there. And we'll take it more to the hottish take to talk about all of this. So replay crew, as you're enjoying this, we'd love your thoughts to help us think about things further. We are going to talk about The Way Down itself as a documentary more specifically, because there is so much in it.
Oh, guys, please watch it and then join us in the conversation in the comments.
And we may even do like a hottish on wellness culture, and then a reaction video to Way Down. Like, this thing is so rich because it's like America in 3 hours. It's nuts.
So
it's
crazy.
Nuts.
It's so crazy.
And so we'll be talking about that. And then again, as always, we want to remind you the other things that will be coming up, we will be talking about. Stay tuned on the channel for coverage of the documentary Fake Famous and the conversation we have about influencers and authenticity. We'll also be continuing to talk about institutional abuse. Thank you again. Sasha will be joining us on the channel at some point to be talking about her personal experience, which she has gratefully offered to all of us to learn from. We'll also be talking about Paris Hilton's full documentary, as she's been talking about that. I've watched a lot of things on the Elan School this week. So guys, I have thoughts and you're going to be hearing them. Don't you worry about that. We also have some great other documentaries and things coming up as we careen into the best time of year, which is when we start talking about holiday movies. So don't worry, get excited for that. In the meantime, if you are watching this and you have never liked or subscribed on YouTube, please do. If you're listening to this and you have not liked or subscribed to the podcast wherever you listen, please do. Also, we have a newsletter that comes out every week that tells you not only a little bit of what's going on in our world, but you get to hear some of our analysis about what's happening. Last week, you talked about some fall movies. And next week, we're going to be talking, this upcoming week, we're going to be talking a little bit about the very nature of fall and what it kind of means as a entity in culture. So that sounds a little esoteric. We're going to crack jokes, guys. Don't worry. It's still going to be really funny.
We always do.
And Sasha, we have not seen the AI versions of Hallmark movies, but we will be looking that up. Don't you worry.
Oh, is that? I think that's the one where the bot, they
write it. Yeah.
Yeah, the bot writes the script. Yeah, they're crazy. They're so funny.
Oh my gosh. We'll see what Jarvis does. In the meantime, pals, as always, thank you for holding our stories as we hold yours. It's been an honor to spend time with you and think a little bit differently about the world. And we will see you next time.
Take care, everybody.